Hamstring injuries are one of the biggest challenges in men's professional football, accounting for nearly a quarter of all injuries, and with a reoccurrence rate of 18%, these injuries can keep players off the field for weeks or even longer. Hamstring injuries are most likely to happen when players sprint over 25 km per hour or reach 80% of their maximal sprinting speed. Sprint training is essential for preventing hamstring injuries. However, both too little and too much sprint training can elevate the risk of injury. This raises an important question: what is the optimal dose of sprinting to minimize injury risk while maximizing performance? Authors Pedro Gómez-Piqueras and Pedro e Alcaraz explore this very question in their article, "If you want to prevent hamstring injuries in soccer, run fast," a narrative review about practical considerations of sprint training. This is Talking Sports Science with a summary of their article. First of all, the authors propose a multidirectional speed model, integrating sprint training throughout the weekly training cycle, using the control chaos continuum. This model tailors sprint training based on each task's complexity, adapting intensity and specificity to match player readiness. It's recommended to gradually introduce sprint training starting in pre-season, beginning with high control, low complexity tasks like straight line sprints to establish a safe training base. As players adapt, coaches can increase training specificity and complexity. For example, training can progress from straight line sprints to game-like scenarios such as attack versus defense drills, where variables like player numbers, field size, and sprint recovery times can be modified to prepare players for match demands. However, sprinting at the right time is key. It's recommended to dedicate speed training 2 days before a match, i.e. match day -2, but monitoring fatigue levels is also crucial. It's recommended to analyse the high-speed work done on match day -4 and match day -3 to tailor the match day -2 sprint workload to each player's needs. If players show signs of fatigue, it's recommended to reduce maximum sprints, limit decelerations, or even avoid high-speed sprints to prevent overloading. Neuromuscular fatigue can be assessed with isometric tests, allowing coaches to fine-tune workloads. When the team has multiple games in a week, speed training can be adjusted based on the cumulative high-speed volume already performed, keeping in mind that players may need between 48 to 72 hours to recover from high-speed sessions, depending on the training dose. Sprint training is particularly important for non-starters, as they may need additional high-speed sessions, either directly after matches or on subsequent days, to maintain their fitness level. To manage sprint doses effectively, GPS systems can be used to monitor player activity profiles. GPS systems categorize speed zones from 0 to 36 km an hour, though there's no consensus on exact threshold definitions. Typically, GPS devices classify sprints at 24 or 25 km per hour. However, using a fixed threshold, such as 24 km an hour, can yield misleading results when comparing players with different maximal sprint speeds. For example, player 1 here has a maximal sprint speed of 33.6 km per hour, while player 2 has a maximal sprint speed of 29.7 km per hour. For player 1, reaching 24 km per hour only requires 71.4% of their maximal sprint speed, whereas player 2 must work harder, reaching 80.8% of their maximal sprint speed. Furthermore, even if both players achieve the same number of sprints over 24 km an hour in a session, their relative effort differs significantly. Furthermore, even if both players achieve the same number of sprints over 24 km per hour in a session, their relative effort differs significantly. For example, here player 1 sprints stay mostly below 85% of their maximal sprint speed, while player 2 sprints often exceed 85% and even 95% of their maximal sprint speed. This demonstrates why it's important to use relative thresholds for individualizing sprint training. Regarding the optimal sprint dose, there is no magic dose that works for all players each week, as the optimal dose will vary depending on each player's position, competition demands, and training dynamics. Therefore, it's recommended to create a sprint profile for each player in relation to the context of competition and their training needs. To prepare players effectively, the sprint training dose should reflect the demands faced in actual gameplay. A training to competition ratio between 0.5 and 1.3 has been suggested, which can serve as a preliminary guide to training. Here are profiles by player position in competition, recorded via multi-camera stadium systems, which can aid setting training doses. However, GPS data from training, which you can see here on the right, and multi-camera data from matches aren't directly comparable. Therefore, it's important to complement this data with GPS data collected during a training week. As a guideline, Pedro and Pedro use the following weekly sprint targets. 35 to 40% of the total sprint volume should be at speeds exceeding 85% of the player's maximal sprint speed, while 15 to 20% of the total sprint volume should be at speeds exceeding 95% of the player's maximal sprint speed. This ensures players face high speed demands similar to those in games, which may help reduce injury risk. Here you can see a typical sprint periodization Pedro and Pedro have used during a competitive microcycle for their players. As you can see, sprint workload peaks on match day -2. The high sprint demand on match day -2 is balanced by reducing load in other areas. In addition, the sprint load on match day -1 is reduced to help achieve the positive effects of pre-match tapering. It should be highlighted these weekly sprint values are tailored to the specific context of the authors, and so replicating these values directly in different settings may lead to inappropriate dosing and unwanted outcomes. Regarding key takeaways to help reduce hamstring injuries in football, the authors recommend to combine training methods throughout training phases to maximize adaptation, include flying sprints from different positions with multidirectional stimuli, for example 10 to 20 meter sprints for acceleration or 45 meter flying sprints for maximal velocity, progress training complexity gradually, distribute weekly load to avoid excessive neuromuscular fatigue, create individual sprint profiles that match competition and training needs, define sprint thresholds specific to each player's maximal sprinting speed, and evaluate regularly to inform future training. And that concludes this presentation. For a deeper dive into sprint training for football, I recommend you go and read the full article. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching, folks. See you next time.